The clock on the wall at Marlin and Company was a liar. It claimed it was only 1:03 in the morning, but the ache in my arches screamed it was closer to dawn. My shift had officially ended 3 minutes ago. I was 27 years old, and my life had been reduced to counting the seconds until I could soak my feet. Iron Haven, Pennsylvania, wasn't built on dreams, it was built on pig iron and rust, and the damp chill of the port crept into everything. Tonight, it was a fine, misting rain that made the streets outside the restaurant's tall windows slick and oily. I was running a damp rag over the espresso machine, the scent of stale coffee and lemon-scented disinfectant burning my nose, when the heavy revolving door moved. It wasn't the usual late-night stragglers. These men didn't stumble in looking for one last drink. They entered like they owned the air we were breathing. And one of them, I knew. "Lila, my girl," he said, sliding onto a stool at the service bar, his voice too smooth for this hour. Bryce Kelton, a man whose face was plastered on "for sale" signs all over the waterfront, promising luxury condos that looked like glass boxes. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months' rent, silver and shiny, reflecting the low lights. He smelled of expensive gin and something sharp, like arrogance. "My shift's over, Bryce," I said, not looking up. I kept wiping. Maria, the other closing waitress, suddenly found the floor behind the bar fascinating. "Always working, always diligent," he chuckled. He slid a folded piece of paper across the polished walnut toward me. It was thick, creamy cardstock, legal. Just a little paperwork, a formality, for your time at Dryline Pier. My hand stopped. The rag suddenly felt cold. Before I was Lila the waitress, I was Lila Hart, safety inspector. I was the one who'd red-flagged his construction site, the one who'd found the reports on the substandard recycled steel being used for the structural supports, the one who'd been fired 2 weeks later after a freak accident with a service elevator. "I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice was low. "Lila, Lila," he tisked, like scolding a child. "This is a generous severance, a relocation bonus. Let's call it $10,000, cash. Just a little thank you for your discretion, and an encouragement to find work somewhere else. Maybe Arizona, I hear it's sunny. $10,000, just enough to be an insult, just enough to make me disappear." The report I filed stands. You used faulty materials. The smile on Bryce's face didn't fade, but it curdled. It became something hard and plastic. "The report you filed," he said, leaning in, "disappeared, and so did your job. That elevator nasty business. A 1 in a million malfunction." He tapped the paper. "Accidents happen every day. Lila, big ones, small ones. It would be a shame if another one happened to you. Maybe something involving a crosswalk or a faulty gas line in your apartment." The air went thin. The background jazz, some sleepy saxophone tune, suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. The clinking of the last diner's fork on their plate was like a hammer hitting an anvil. I looked at Maria. She was polishing glasses so hard I thought they'd break. Her back rigid. She wouldn't look at me. I was alone. That's when the revolving door moved again. It hissed on its track, slow, deliberate. The rain outside seemed to pause. The man who entered was the opposite of Bryce Kelton. Bryce was all silver shine and loud cologne. This man was a void. He wore a minimalist black suit, tailored so perfectly it looked less like clothing and more like a part of him. Over it, a trench coat made of some dark, technical fabric that shed the rain in tiny, perfect beads. He wasn't large, not in the way Bryce's 2 beefy companions were large, but he took up all the space. His footsteps were silent on the marble floor. He moved to the far end of the bar, his back to the wall, his gaze sweeping the room once. It felt like he was taking inventory, measuring. 3 other men had followed him in. They didn't cluster, they dispersed. One, with a lean, watchful face, took a stool near the door. Another, broad-shouldered, headed toward the corridor to the restrooms. The third, younger, with restless eyes, stayed near the middle of the room, ostensibly looking at the menu board. A whisper shot down the bar from the bartender, muttered to Maria, "Ardent, that's Silas Ardent." Maria's head snapped up. Her face went pale. Even I knew that name. You couldn't live in Ironhaven and not know it. The Ardent Syndicate. They didn't own the docks. They were the docks. They were the shadows that moved the real cargo. The power that existed long before Bryce Kelton's glass boxes were even a blueprint. Bryce, oblivious, or maybe just too arrogant to care, turned his attention back to me. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, his manicured nails digging in. "Last chance. Sweetheart, sign the paper, or I walk you out of here myself." A hot, sick fear rose in my throat. Tangled with a sudden, burning rage, I ripped my arm out of his grasp. The motion knocked his gin glass, spilling the clear liquid and a lime wedge onto the bar top. "Who even are you?" I spat the words at Bryce. My voice was shaking, but it was loud. "Who do you think you are?" The restaurant, already quiet, went utterly still. The question hung in the dead air, and it wasn't Bryce who answered it. "I'm the man standing between you and the wolves." The voice came from my left. Silas Ardent. I hadn't even seen him move from the end of the bar. He was standing right there, by the service station. He calmly removed his black leather gloves, placing them one by one on the walnut counter. He looked up, not at me, but at Bryce. His eyes were a flat, cold gray, like the harbor in winter. The silence in the Marlin and Company was absolute. You could have heard a napkin fall. Bryce's two bodyguards, the ones who had been enjoying a plate of calamari, started to push their chairs back. They were big men, used to solving problems by being large. Silas's men didn't stand, they just adjusted. The man by the door, Knox, leaned back on his stool, one foot hooking the leg of the table in front of him. It was a casual move, but it completely blocked the most direct path from the bodyguards to me. The man by the hallway, Ira, simply turned in his chair, as if to ask the bartender a question, his arm resting on the back of the chair next to him. It cut off the angle from the other side. The young one, Vale, picked up a menu and stepped backward, putting himself directly between Bryce and the main exit. It was subtle. It was elegant. It was a perfect three-point trap, executed in less than 2 seconds without a single raised voice. Bryce's face had gone a mottled red. "This is a private conversation," he blustered. Silas ignored him. His gaze fell on the spilled gin soaking into the white linen napkin I'd been holding. He picked up a fresh, clean napkin from the service stack. He walked the few steps to Bryce's table. Bryce instinctively flinched back. Silas didn't look at him. He began to carefully, precisely, dab at the puddle of gin on the tablecloth. "You just soiled a woman earning an honest living," Silas said. His voice was still quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "You put your hands on her, and you spilled your drink." He pressed the napkin down, soaking up the last of it. He looked at Bryce. In Ironhaven, that has consequences. My eyes darted from Silas to Bryce, and that's when I saw it. The leg of Bryce's bar stool, the one he'd just been sitting on. The front left leg, the metal bracket at the top, where it joined the seat, was loose, not just needs a screwdriver loose. The bolts were backed almost all the way out, if he had put his full weight on it, or leaned forward. My blood went cold. The elevator, the sudden sickening lurch, the snap of the cable that wasn't supposed to snap. The inspection report I had filed had been altered. The maintenance logs had been falsified. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. And this was the follow-up. My heart was a trapped bird against my ribs. Silas Ardent straightened up. He dropped the damp napkin on the table in front of Bryce. He turned his head slightly, catching the eye of Leo, the chef, who was frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Leo," Silas said, his voice calm, "I think we need a change of music." Leo nodded wide-eyed. He fumbled with a switch behind the counter. The sleepy saxophone cut off. A second later, the main house lights clicked on. Not the warm, amber atmosphere lighting, the bright, sterile, overhead fluorescents, the ones we used for cleaning. The sudden, harsh white light exposed everything. The streaks on the floor, the desperation on Bryce's face, the fear on Maria's, the illusion of the cozy, upscale restaurant was gone. It was just a room, a brightly lit box. Bryce Kelton stumbled back a step. This wasn't his world. He operated in the shadowy margins, in backroom handshakes and implied threats. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and someone had just set the pasture on fire. I stared at Silas Ardent, my rescuer, my intuition. The same gut feeling that screamed at me about the bad steel was now screaming that this man was 1,000 times more dangerous than Bryce. He was the apex predator, but he was standing between me and the wolves. Silas signaled to my manager, who was hiding near the register. "The bill," he said, "for the entire room, for the whole night." He slid a black, featureless card across the bar. "And call everyone a cab." He turned to me. He didn't smile. He just nodded toward the glass doors leading to the side patio, where the rain was now coming down in earnest. "I'm going outside." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. I followed him. My legs felt disconnected from my body. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, damp air. The city smelled of the harbor, of salt and diesel and wet pavement. Silas stood by the railing, untouched by the rain, as if it wouldn't dare. He looked at me, his gray eyes assessing me in the dim light. There was no pity in them, just focus. "You have 2 minutes," he said. His voice was low, almost lost in the sound of the downpour. "You have to decide. You come with me, or you let them." He tilted his head back toward the restaurant, where Bryce was now shouting frantically into his phone, "Escort you." My gaze drifted from his face to the street beyond. Across the rain-slicked pavement, a black sedan, parked in a no-standing zone. The engine was running. I could see the faint plume of exhaust. A man in the passenger seat. He was leaning forward, into the light of the dashboard. He was busy. He was attaching a long, thick, black cylinder to the threaded barrel of a handgun. A suppressor. My breath hitched. They weren't just going to scare me. They weren't going to put me in a cab. They were going to silence me. For good. For $10,000. The choice was gone. It had never been a choice at all. It was just survival. I turned around. I walked back inside, past the shocked faces of my manager and Maria. I walked right up to the bar. I grabbed the damp, stained linen apron tied around my waist. I untied the knot. I balled it up in my hand and threw it onto the counter, right next to Bryce's spilled gin. I turned, walked back out the door, and stood in front of Silas Ardent. The cold rain was already soaking my hair, running down my face like tears, but I wasn't crying. "I'll go." Silas didn't offer a hand. He simply turned and walked into the rain, not toward the street, but disappearing down the dark service alley beside the restaurant. The man named Knox was waiting, holding open the rear door of a car I hadn't even registered. It was parked in the shadows, a heavy, dark sedan, an Orphic. The brand was obscure, built for privacy, not flash. I slid onto the leather seat, the door closed beside me, and the world vanished. It didn't click shut, it thunked, a heavy, vacuum-sealed sound of a vault door locking into place, the noise of Ironhaven, the rain, the distant sirens. Bryce Kelton's muffled shouting from the restaurant was instantly gone, muted to a low, distant hum. The interior was stark, smelling of clean leather and of faint, sterile ozone. The windows were impossibly thick, maybe 2 inches. Silas sat in the rear-facing seat, watching me. There was no small talk. "Bryce Kelton is a symptom," he said, his voice perfectly even in the silent cabin. Knox was in the driver's seat, separated from us by a thick glass partition, but I could see his eyes in the digital mirror. He's the legitimate face for a group called the Azure Crown. The investment firm, I knew the name. They were the ones funding Kelton's glassbox condos. They're just developers. They were developers, Silas corrected. Now they're in logistics, shipping, and hostile acquisitions. They want the port, my port. He let that hang in the air. To take it, they have to remove the ardent syndicate. They prefer to do it with leveraged buyouts and political pressure. But his gray eyes met mine. They are not above using subcontractors for problems that won't go away. Me, I said flatly. The cold from the rain was seeping into my bones. I was a problem that wouldn't go away. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my throat. I found the flaw at Dryline Pier. I found it. The memory was so clear, hot and sharp. They were using recycled structural steel. It was junk. Its tensile strength was 30% below code. They weren't building condos. They were building a 700-foot steel trap. I could feel the old, familiar rage rising. I filed my report. I didn't just flag it, I documented everything. The faked shipping manifests, the doctored inspection logs. I handed the entire file over to the Federal Commerce and Intelligence Bureau. My contact, he seemed eager. A week later, my keycard didn't work. I was called into a regional meeting about procedural errors. The next day, my report was gone, wiped from the FCIB servers, and I was the one under investigation for falsifying documents. Then, the words caught in my throat. Then the accident happened. My service elevator, case closed, Lila Hart, disgraced inspector. Silas watched me, his expression unreadable. He wasn't offering sympathy. He was assessing. When I finished, he reached into the breast pocket of his suit coat and produced a book. It was small, bound in dark leather, the cover worn glossy and smooth with decades of use. He placed it on the polished console between us. "This belonged to my predecessor," he said, "the man who raised me. It's a handwritten ledger from the 1970s, back when the port ran on paper, not servers." I hesitated, then picked it up. The pages were thick, yellowed, and smelled of old paper, leather, and something metallic, like pennies. The script was a tight, looping cursive, archaic. It looked like nonsense. Lists of crane numbers, container weights, dates, but mixed in with the text were symbols, hand-drawn diagrams. My fingers traced one. That's a coefficient for torsional stress. I looked closer. And this is an old industrial notation for hydraulic pressure. My engineering degree, my specialized focus on industrial history, it was all coming back. "The Azure Crown is bleeding us," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "They're using shell companies, bad infrastructure contracts, and exploiting flaws in the port's own systems. I believe the key to how they're doing it. The original sin is in that book, but it's written in a dialect only an old-school dock engineer would understand." He paused. "Or a modern safety inspector who specialized in the history of industrial mathematics." My head snapped up. The chill I felt had nothing to do with the rain. "You investigated me. You knew all this. You didn't just happen to be at the restaurant." "I investigate everyone who crosses Bryce Kelton's path and survives." He said, "You knew what I could do. That's why you saved me." "I knew you were a loose end they needed to tie," he corrected, his voice soft but firm. "I don't save people, Lila. I don't rescue those who don't want to be rescued. But you just chose to get in the car." His words hung in the air, a contract already signed. A quiet chime came from the dashboard. Knox's voice, filtered through an intercom, was flat. "We have company. Black sedan. The one from the restaurant. 2 cars back and closing." I instinctively looked out the rear window. It was them. The man with the suppressor. They were weaving through the sparse late-night traffic, gaining fast. "Steel Petrel Bridge," Silas ordered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seem concerned at all. Knox didn't speed up. He just drove. The Orphic slid onto the on-ramp, the heavy chassis stable and smooth. We ascended the bridge, a long, high arc of red-painted iron that spanned the dark, oily water of the Iron Haven estuary. The city lights glittered on the choppy waves far below. The black sedan was right on our tail now, close enough that I could see the furious expression on the driver's face. "Now, Knox," Silas said. Knox tapped a command on the central touchscreen. I heard nothing. No sound, no change in motion. But behind us, the sedan suddenly, violently swerved. It slammed on its brakes, tires smoking, and almost clipped the concrete barrier. The car behind it blared its horn. Swerving to avoid a collision, the sedan was stopped, dead, in the middle of the bridge. It looked lost. "What did you do?" I whispered. Their GPS, their phones, and their car's navigation system are all informing them that they are currently in the middle of the estuary, 300 feet below us, Silas explained, turning his gaze from the chaos behind us. "A little digital misdirection. They'll recover. By then, we'll be gone." True to his word, Knox took the next exit, plunging the car into a maze of dark, identical-looking warehouses in the old industrial sector, block after block of silent brick giants. He finally turned into a narrow, unlit alley, barely wide enough for the car, and stopped in front of a heavy, rolling steel door set into a wall of ancient, moss-green brick. The door rolled up, revealing a concrete loading bay, and we drove inside, the door sealed behind us. And the silence was absolute. This was the rookery. It wasn't a gangster den. It wasn't what I'd expected at all. The interior was vast, clean and organized. It smelled of old concrete, ozone, and paper. High-end computer servers hummed quietly in glass-enclosed racks. The walls were incredibly thick, and I could see sections covered in modern, gray acoustic paneling, soundproof. A woman was waiting for us. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp features and dark hair pulled into a severe, tight bun. She wore expensive-looking tailored slacks and a silk blouse under a blazer. She looked like she belonged in a courtroom, not a warehouse. "Mara Quinn," she said. Her voice was crisp. She didn't offer a hand. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, a rapid, professional assessment. "You're wet. You'll be dysfunctional in an hour." She nodded at Vale, the young, restless one from the restaurant, who silently handed me a neatly folded bundle, a plain gray sweatsuit and a thick towel. "Bathroom is through that door, on the left," Mara said, pointing. "Dry off. We need you functional. There's tea." It was the strangest, most professional kidnapping I could have imagined. Her tone was all business, but the offer of dry clothes and tea was an unexpected, practical warmth. I took the bundle, my hands shaking slightly. "Thank you." When I returned, feeling human again in the soft, warm sweats, Silas was standing in front of a massive wall. It was covered, floor to ceiling, in a corkboard map of Ironhaven. It wasn't a street map. It was a map of money and power. Red yarn connected shell companies to offshore accounts. Green yarn linked politicians to lobbying firms. And a bright electric blue yarn emanated from a central pin labeled Azure Crown. The blue thread snaked out, like a spider's web, to dozens of other pins: Kelton Realty, Viridian Art Gallery, the Harborview Children's Fund. And one pin, a pin that made my stomach clench and the blood drain from my face: Apex Lift and Elevator Corp., the company that had serviced the elevator I'd been in. The company whose maintenance logs I had flagged as fraudulent. "It wasn't an accident," I whispered, staring at the pin. It was an acquisition." "They needed you discredited," Silas said from behind me. "They couldn't have a city inspector digging into their books. Once you were gone, they finalized their takeover of the port's safety and maintenance contracts. Apex is one of their primary channels for laundering money." He moved to a heavy steel desk. "Which brings us to the present. We have a mutual interest. You want your name back? I want my port back. Bryce Kelton and the Azure Crown stand in the way of both." He laid out the terms. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of facts. "I will provide you with absolute protection. This location, food, security. You will analyze that ledger. You will find the leverage I need to dismantle their operation. In exchange," he said, "when this is over, I will use my influence at the Ironhaven Port Commission to ensure the full, unaltered truth of your original report is brought to light. Your name will be cleared, and you will be fully compensated for your dismissal." It was clean. It was also a cage, just a different kind. I'd just swapped one dangerous man's control for another's. I looked him in the eye. "I need another clause." Mara Quinn, who was typing silently at a nearby terminal, scoffed without looking up. "We don't do clauses, Miss Hart." Silas held up a hand, silencing her. He just watched me. "Go on." "I get to walk," I said. My voice was stronger than I expected. "If I decide this isn't right, if I find out you're no better than they are, I get a safe withdrawal clause. You let me go. No strings, no follow-ups, no accidents. You give me your word." Mara stopped typing. Silas studied me for a long, silent moment. I felt like I was back in that elevator, waiting for the impact. He was weighing me, calculating. Then he nodded at once. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple paper receipt. It was from the Marlin and Company. He turned it over to the blank white back. With a heavy, graphite-colored fountain pen, he wrote 2 lines. "L. Hart, safe passage. Anytime." He signed it with 2 letters. A.S. He slid it across the desk. It wasn't a legal document, it was a promise, written on a scrap of paper. In his world, I suspected that meant more than any lawyer's contract. I folded it carefully and put it in the deep pocket of my new sweatpants. I had just secured my exit when Ira, the broad-shouldered man, entered the room, moving quickly. He spoke in a low voice to Silas, but in the soundproof room, I heard every word. "We have a problem. Lookout just flagged a convoy. Harborview Civil Security. At least 6 vehicles mobilizing for a full-scale raid on the waterfront. They're starting in this sector." Silas's jaw tightened. "HCSU doesn't move that fast unless they're pointed. Someone leaked our new location." "Impossible," Mara said, standing up. "The rookery has been dark for 6 months. No one outside this room knew we were activating it tonight." Silas's cold gray eyes snapped to me. "The restaurant. Besides Kelton's crew, who knew you were in trouble? Who did you talk to?" "No one," I said, my mind racing. "Maria, the other waitress, she hid Leo, the chef. He was in the kitchen. And then it hit me, like a physical blow." "Colt." "Colt," Silas repeated. "Colt Ramirez, the new night manager. He started 2 weeks ago." The pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. "He's been odd, asking me questions about my schedule, where I lived. He was the one who called me in tonight, said they were short-staffed. But when I got there, Maria and I were the only closers." "He put you on the board," Silas finished, understanding instantly. "It was a setup. He knew Kelton was coming for you." "He must have seen us leave," I said, my stomach twisting. "He saw the car. He must have called someone." "Knox," Silas said, not to the room, but into his cuff. "Find Colt Ramirez. Gently." He turned back to me. The HCSU was on its way. His safe house was compromised, and I was the one who had led them here. "Start with him," Silas said. "He wasn't talking to his crew. He was talking to me." He held out a small, molded earpiece. It was black, ergonomic, and cool to the touch. "Mara will set you up with the ledger and a workstation," he said. "The HCSU is a problem, but Colt is the leak. I need to know who he reports to. I need to know why he set you up." I stared at the device. I'm not a spy. I'm an inspector." "You're not a waitress either," Silas countered. He was already shrugging back into his trench coat, which was still damp from the rain. "You're a safety inspector? You find what's broken? This," he gestured to the sprawling, chaotic map on the wall, "is broken." I took the earpiece and fitted it into my ear. It clicked softly. A perfect, custom fit. Silas paused at the loading bay door, looking back at me. "Tonight, Lila," he said, his voice now a quiet hum directly in my ear. "You're my eyes." Mara set me up in a small, windowless office that felt like it was carved out of the warehouse's original foundation. The only light came from a heavy-duty sodium lamp on an articulated arm, the kind I used to use for examining hairline fractures in steel. It cast a harsh, yellow-orange glow over the steel desk. One wall was just a sheet of dark glass, a one-way mirror. I was in a box, but I could see the main operations floor outside. I was an asset, being observed. I pushed that thought aside. I had work, Mara had brought me a fresh, steaming mug of tea. It was a gesture of function, not comfort, and I was fine with that. I opened the ledger. The smell hit me first. Old cowhide, a century of dust, and the faint, metallic tang of faded iron gall ink. I spread the book open under the sodium light. The pages were thick, almost like cardstock, and the looping, disciplined cursive was from another era. For the first hour, it was just noise. Lists of cargo manifests, crane maintenance schedules, payroll deductions from the 1970s. Then, my earpiece crackled to life. Silas's voice, not to me, but to someone else. Status, Knox. Target acquired. Colt Ramirez is in his apartment. He's packing a bag. Hold position. I want to know who he calls. Silas replied. The audio was crystal clear. I could hear a distant siren in the background of his feed, the sound of the city he moved through like a ghost. I tried to tune it out and focus. I turned a page, and there it was. Not text, but a diagram, a small, precise drawing in the margin, a circle with a vector arrow indicating a rotational force, the symbol for torque. It was next to a number, 5%. My fingers traced the symbol. In my old job, torque was everything. It was the measure of stress, of leverage, of the force that could twist a steel beam into scrap. Why was a dock manager logging it next to a percentage? A few pages later, another one, a different symbol, a triangle over a line, the notation for a depreciation point or structural load. Next to it, dry line pier, 2%. Dry line pier, my breath caught. It's not a structural log, I whispered to myself. The words fogging in the cold room. It's a payment log. My mind, trained to see patterns in industrial data, suddenly saw the whole picture. The torque wasn't about cranes. It was about leverage, political pressure, a 5% commission. The depreciation symbol wasn't for a failing girder. It was for a devalued asset, a 2% cut for making a problem go away. This wasn't a manager's diary. It was a detailed, coded ledger of corruption. He's moving, Silas! Knox's voice cut in again. Target's in the alley. We're on him. I heard a scuffle, a muffled grunt, then Silas's voice, impossibly calm. Mister? Ramirez, you chose the wrong side. Who do you report to? There was no answer, just the sound of heavy breathing. I forced myself to look away from the one-way glass, as if I could see them. My hands were clammy. I turned the page, and the book was damaged. The bottom quarter of page 47 had been torn out. It wasn't a clean cut. It was a jagged, serrated rip. I stared at it, my heart hammering a sudden, frantic rhythm. I knew that tear. I ripped open the portfolio I'd carried out of my apartment, the one thing I'd grabbed, containing the last vestiges of my old life. I pulled out the fraudulent elevator maintenance invoice from Apex Lift, the one that had cleared them of all wrongdoing. It had been stapled to a faked work order. I laid the invoice on top of the ledger. The top edge of the invoice was serrated, a perforated rip from a carbon copy book. I lined it up with the torn edge in the ledger. They matched. Perfectly. The room spun. My hand trembled so violently I knocked the heavy mug, spilling hot tea across the desk. This book, this 70-year-old book, was directly, physically connected to the accident that had almost ended my life. This wasn't history. This was now. I was staring at the matched edges, my vision blurring, a cold, sick feeling rising in my throat. I was going to be sick. Breathe. Silas's voice, this time spoken directly to me. It wasn't a command. It was a low, steady anchor in my ear. I can't, I stammered, my eyes fixed on the evidence. It's the same. Look at it, Lila. His voice was warmer now, closer. He must have seen me through the glass before he left, or maybe he just knew. You're not in this room to fall apart. You're in this room to look the thing that broke you right in the eye. Now, tell me what you see. I took a sharp, ragged breath. He was right. The shaking in my hands wasn't just fear. It was rage. I forced my fingers to steady. I pushed the invoice aside and looked at the page before the tear. It was a list, a list of acquisitions, and a new symbol, a blue crown. "Silas," I said, my voice hoarse, but gaining strength. "I'm looking, and I see a name, Director Jalen Crow, next to the blue crown symbol." Silence on the comms, then Mara, feed miss, heart the audio from Periloom. Now. My monitor flickered. Mara's face appeared in a small window. "What did you find?" "A name, Jalen Crow." Mara's eyes widened. Just a fraction. The screen changed. It was audio only. Silas's voice recorded, meeting someone in a place with loud, chiming 8-bit music, an old arcade. The intel was good. "Perry," Silas was saying. A reedy, nervous voice answered, "I live to serve, Mr. Ardent, Information Hyena. They call me. I just dig up what's buried. This was buried deep, from a security camera at a private club, 2 nights after the inspector girl got the boot." The audio cleaned up. I heard Bryce Kelton's slick voice. The 10,000 was generous. Director. She could have been reasonable. And another voice. Smooth. Authoritative. Reason isn't in her vocabulary. Bryce. Which is why the real FCIB file is gone, and the internal one now lists her as a liability. My Director Jalen Crow persona is holding up nicely. The feds trust me completely. They think she's a loose cannon. My blood ran cold. The man I'd handed my file to. The man I had trusted to do the right thing. He wasn't just corrupt. He was an imposter. Jalen Crow wasn't his name. He worked for the Azure Crown. The audio file ended. I was just staring at the black screen. "He was a fake," I said to Mara. The whole thing, the whole investigation, it was a performance. "And you just linked him to a 70-year-old ledger," Mara said. Her voice was pure business, but I could hear a new thread of respect. "Keep digging, Miss Hart. The HCSU raid stalled out. They hit the wrong warehouse. Silas bought us time. Use it." Her face vanished. I was alone again with the book, but I wasn't the same person I was an hour ago. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the rage was a fire. I turned the page, and I started to work. For the next 3 hours, the world ceased to exist outside the yellow cone of the sodium lamp. I cross-referenced the names in the ledger with the corporate entities on Mara's wall map. The pieces didn't just fit, they snapped together like a machine. The coded entries weren't just about the port, they were about the city. I found the cold transaction points. They were properties, locations, an abandoned church on the north side, the old Cordelia Mills pasta factory, and water pump station number 12, out by the old shipyards, places the Azure Crown was using to move something. Then I found the housing scam. It was brutal in its simplicity. They were using federal housing aid funds, routed through the Harborview Children's Fund charity, to buy up entire blocks of old tenement apartments, low-income housing. "Mara," I said, hitting the intercom, "get me municipal fire reports for these addresses." The reports fed into my screen. I saw the pattern: a small, accidental fire in the boiler room, another in a laundry facility, never enough to trigger a full-scale evacuation, but just enough to get the buildings condemned. The property values plummeted. The tenants were forced out. And a shell company bought the land for pennies on the dollar. "They're not just moving money," I said, my voice shaking with disgust. "They're moving people. They're burning them out of their homes." I kept going, my fingers flying over the pages, cross-referencing my notes, and then I found the final entry. It wasn't a code. It was a date, a schedule. Gallery Viridian, tomorrow night, art auction, transfer complete. I checked the ledger again. The amount listed next to the auction entry was staggering. It wasn't a commission, it was the whole pot. They were cashing out. "Mara," I said, my voice sharp, "they're moving everything tomorrow night at the Gallery Viridian party." The door to the office hissed open. Silas Ardent stood there. His trench coat was off. He was just in his black suit, his tie perfectly straight. He looked impossibly calm, but his eyes were sharp. He'd been listening. "Report?" he said. I stood up. I pointed to the ledger. I pointed to the map. I laid it all out. the fake director, Jalen Crow, the coded ledger, the housing scam, the small fires, the cold transaction points, and finally, the auction. They're liquidating, I finished, my voice ringing with a certainty that surprised me. Tomorrow night, they're moving the entire fund. It's not just a party, it's the exit. He was silent for a long time. He walked over to the desk, looked at the matched tear between the ledger and the invoice. He looked at my frantic, sprawling notes. He looked back at me. His expression was complex. It was pride, sharp and clear, but it was cut with a deep, cautious skepticism. He was impressed, but he wasn't sold. "You're sure?" he asked. "An art auction." "It's the perfect cover," I said, meeting his gaze. "High value, subjective items, anonymous buyers. It's the easiest way to wash that much money in one night. And I'm not sure, and Mr. Ardent, I'm certain. I spent 3 years auditing safety reports. This is just another kind of machine, and it's set to blow." He nodded slowly. "Vale and Knox will handle the gallery." "No." The word was out of my mouth before I could stop it. He raised an eyebrow. "No," I said again, stronger this time. "Your men are their soldiers. They look for threats. I'm an inspector. I look for flaws. You send them in. They'll see guns. I go in. I'll see the fire exits, the security panel flaws, the discrepancies in the auction catalog. I'll see this." I tapped the ledger. "You need me in there." I took a breath. I'm not the girl you pulled out of the rain anymore. I'm not just the asset you need to protect. I'm the one who read the book. I'm the one who sees the pattern. I don't want to be safe. I want to be in that gallery. I want to finish this. Silas stared at me, his gray eyes searching my face. I'd challenged him. I'd changed the terms of our agreement. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his suit jacket. He pulled out an object. It was a pen, sleek, matte black, and heavy. He held it out to me. I took it. It felt cold and perfectly balanced in my hand. "It's a laser etcher," he said. "Industrial grade, for marking steel." I looked up at him, confused. "You're right," he said. "You're not an asset. You're an inspector. You find what's broken." He tapped the pen in my hand. "This is the key to cut the last string tying you to your past. Go find the flaws. Lila." I don't know what time it was. Time had become a fluid, meaningless concept in the windowless, soundproof world of the rookery. It could have been 3 a.m. It could have been noon. After my debrief with Silas, Mara had pointed me to a small, Spartan cot in a room that was little more than a closet. But my mind was too wired to sleep. The adrenaline from the investigation, the validation of being right, and the looming, terrifying reality of the art gallery, it was all churning inside me. A toxic, electric cocktail. I finally gave up on sleep and wandered out, my bare feet cold on the smooth concrete floor of the main operations area. The place was quiet. Vale was asleep in a chair, his head tilted back, a rifle resting across his lap. Ira was gone. The bank of monitors that Mara had been commanding was now running a silent, automated diagnostic. A single light was on, coming from a small, functional kitchen alcove I hadn't noticed before, just stainless steel counters and a commercial-grade coffee machine. Silas was there. His back was to me. He'd removed his suit jacket and in just his white shirt and black trousers. He looked different, less like an icon, more like a man. His sleeves were rolled up to his forearms, precise, tight folds. He was doing something at the counter. I heard the clink of a ceramic mug, the rush of steaming water. He seemed so focused, as if he were defusing a bomb, not making a drink. He must have heard me, or maybe just sensed me, because he spoke without turning. "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you." I said, my voice was husky. I don't sleep much." He turned. He was holding 2 heavy, dark blue mugs. "This," he said, holding one out to me, "is not for staying awake." I stepped forward and took it. The ceramic was hot, a welcome. Grounding pain against my cold hands, the smell hit me, rich and dark, with a sharp, sweet spike of cinnamon, hot cocoa, from a packet, Probably. But it felt like the most luxurious thing I'd ever held. "Thank you," I murmured, wrapping my hands around it, letting the steam warm my face. As he handed it to me, his fingers brushed the back of my hand. It was an accident, a fleeting, fractional contact, but it felt like a static shock. His skin was warm. I pulled my hand back, cradling the mug. "You're still shaking," he observed. It wasn't an accusation. "Adrenaline, or maybe I'm just cold." "It's the adrenaline," he said. He leaned back against the steel counter, sipping his own cocoa. "It's a useful tool, until it's not. It makes your hands tremble, clouds your judgment. Tomorrow at the gallery. You can't afford that." "So what do you suggest?" I asked, a little sharper than I intended. "A tranquilizer." He almost smiled. "Breathing." I must have looked as skeptical as I felt. "Breathing." "You're breathing from your chest," he said. "Short, panicked, it's a flight or fight response. You're fueling the panic. You need to breathe from your diaphragm. You need to lock it down." He set his mug on the counter. "Put your hand on your stomach. Right here." He gestured to a spot just below his breastbone. I hesitated. It felt strange, like a high school acting class, but I did it, placing my free hand on my stomach over the soft gray sweatshirt. "Now, breathe in through your nose," he instructed. His voice was low, hypnotic. "Slowly, for a 4 count, and don't let your chest move. Push your hand out. Fill your stomach with air." I tried. It felt awkward, forced. "Again, acting," he said. "In, 2, 3, 4. I focused, drawing the air in, feeling the muscles in my abdomen tighten and push against my palm. "Good, now hold it. 4 counts. I held it. The room was silent. "Now out, through your mouth, 8 counts, slow, like you're blowing out a candle you don't want to extinguish." I exhaled, a long, slow stream of air. "Again," he commanded. "In, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We stood there, less than 3 feet apart, in the sterile kitchen of a criminal safe house, just breathing. I listened to the sound of his breath, perfectly controlled, a quiet, rhythmic whoosh in the silence. I matched my rhythm to his, in, hold, out. After the 4th cycle, the frantic hummingbird in my chest began to slow, the shaking in my hands subsided. The world, which had been a sharp, vibrating blur, softened at the edges. "It works," I said, my voice surprised. "It locks the hands," he said, his voice still that same quiet, steady cadence. "It stills the mind. When you're in that gallery, when your heart starts to pound, you go back to this, you lock it down." He was still leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. As he had gestured, I'd seen it. Under the bright, functional kitchen light, a scar. It was on the inside of his right wrist, just above the bone. It was thin, white, and perfectly straight, like a surgical incision. But it wasn't. I'd seen scars like that before. In my old job, it was a wire cut, a snapped steel cable, a safety line, something that had cut him to the bone. He saw me looking. His expression didn't change, but he uncrossed his arms, and his sleeve slid down just a fraction, partially obscuring it. It was a story he wouldn't tell, a past that was just as present as my own. We stood in silence. It was no longer the tense, awkward quiet of 2 strangers. It was something else, a shared space. All I could hear was the faint hum of the servers from the other room and the steady, insistent drum of the rain on the warehouse's vast tin roof, the sound I'd first heard from his car, the sound of the storm that had thrown us together. I looked up from his wrist, up past the dark mug he was holding, and met his eyes. "Thank you," I said. It wasn't just for the cocoa. It wasn't just for the breathing lesson. It was for the restaurant, for not treating me like a victim but like a specialist, for seeing me. My heart, which had just calmed, gave a single, hard, painful thump. He didn't reply, just watched me, his gray eyes seeming to map the exhaustion on my face. The light was harsh, but it softened the lines around his eyes, lines of vigilance I hadn't seen before. Slowly, as if not to spook a deer, he raised his free hand. He didn't reach for my face or my shoulder. He reached for a single, damp strand of hair that had escaped my ponytail and was clinging to my temple. His fingers, which I'd only seen as strong, decisive, and dangerous, placing gloves on a bar, signing a promise on a receipt, were impossibly gentle. He brushed the hair back from my skin. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure, undiluted contact. He tucked the strand behind my ear, and his fingers lingered. Just for half a second, his knuckles rested against the curve of my cheekbone. It wasn't a caress, it was a question. I could have pulled away. I could have stepped back, taken a sip of cocoa, and broken the spell. My every instinct for self-preservation, honed over the last 6 months of running and hiding, told me to... Instead, I did the opposite. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just leaned into the touch, a fractional, almost imperceptible movement, and then I gave a single, short nod. Consent. Clear and absolute. His eyes closed for a second. He let out a breath, not of exhaustion, but of something else. Acceptance. He set his mug down on the counter with a quiet click. He didn't kiss me. He stepped forward, into my space, and rested his forehead against mine. I froze. This was more intimate than any kiss. I could feel the warmth of his skin. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, the wool of his trousers, and beneath it all, the sharp, metallic tang of his fountain pen, leather and ink. I closed my eyes, and my world shrank to this single point of contact. His breath, warm and tasting of cocoa, ghosted across my lips. My hands, still clutching the mug, were trapped between us. We just stood there, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. His heart, his steady, controlled heartbeat, I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it. A low, rhythmic vibration through the floor, through his body, into mine. I wanted to be closer. My hands, acting on their own, moved. I set my mug down on the shelf beside us, the one stacked with institutional white plates. I didn't know what I was doing until my hands found his waist. I slid them around his back, over the fine cotton of his shirt, feeling the impossible. Coiled strength there, the cool fabric, and the intense, radiating heat of the man beneath it. That was all the invitation he needed. He angled his head. His lips, which I'd only seen set in a hard, determined line, were soft. The first touch was hesitant, careful. It wasn't a kiss of possession. It was one of discovery. It was slow and deep, and it tasted of dark chocolate and cinnamon and the Iron Haven rain. I felt something in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying since the elevator, a knot of fear and anger and loneliness, just unravel. A small, involuntary sound, half laugh, half sigh, escaped my throat. It was the sound of relief. He felt it. He pulled back, just an inch, his lips still brushing mine, his eyes, now dark and heavy-lidded, opened. He looked at me. "Are you okay?" The question was there, clear as day, without him saying a word. My answer was to tangle my fingers in the fabric of his shirt, grip it tight, and pull him back to me. The second kiss was different. It wasn't discovery. It was need. It was the release of all the pent-up tension of the last 24 hours. It was the frantic, desperate acknowledgement that we were two people standing on the edge of a cliff. My fingers moved from his waist, up his back, feeling the sharp, strong line of his shoulders. His hand, the one that had touched my hair, moved to my jaw, his thumb tracing the bone, his grip firm and grounding. He held me like I was something precious, something he was protecting, and something he wanted, all at the same time. My breath hitched. My heart was racing again, but this wasn't panic. It was something else entirely. The air was getting thick and hot, and the kiss was deepening, moving from comfort to something more. And just when I was about to lose myself in it, just when I was ready to fall, he stopped. He didn't pull away abruptly. He just gentled the kiss, eased it back. His lips moved from mine, trailing a line of fire, to my temple. He rested his mouth there, breathing heavily, his hand still cupping my face. "No rush," he whispered. His voice was thick, a low gravel. "Not tonight." He pressed a final, firm kiss to my temple. "Tonight you need to sleep. You need to be sharp." He pulled his head back, though he didn't release me. I sagged against him, my forehead finding the hollow of his shoulder, resting against his chest. I could hear it now. His heart. It wasn't the steady metronome from before. It was hammering, just as fast as mine. His restraint, his control. He wasn't a wolf like Bryce. He was something else. And that control, the fact that he had stopped when I wouldn't have, turned the wildfire of desire into something solid. Trust. I leaned against him, listening to his heart slow, matching my breathing to his, just as he'd taught me. After a long moment, I stepped back. He let me go. "Your room?" he said. It wasn't an order. I nodded, feeling dazed, and turned. I walked to the small door. When I got there, I paused and looked back. Silas was still standing by the counter. He hadn't moved. He watched me, his expression one I couldn't quite read, but as I watched, the corner of his mouth lifted. It wasn't a smile. Not really. It was too small, too rare, but it was there. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice back to its normal, calm timbre. "It's my turn to take your orders. Miss Hart." I slept for 4 hours. It wasn't sleep. Really, it was a dark, dreamless void, and I woke up feeling not rested, but rebooted. The girl who had cried over a 70-year-old ledger was gone. The woman who woke up knew her purpose. Mara was a machine. By the time I'd finished a second cup of tea, she had manufactured a complete identity for me. Leah Harcourt, curatorial intern, fresh from a 6-month stint at a gallery in Philadelphia. She'd fabricated an entire digital footprint, a social media profile with pictures of art I'd supposedly admired, a resume, and even a faked, glowing letter of recommendation from a curator who, Mara assured me, was currently on a silent retreat in Nepal and wouldn't be answering his phone. My uniform was a severe, ridiculously expensive-looking black dress that Mara had produced from a storage locker. "Azure Crown values aesthetics," she'd said, her voice dry. "You look the part." I practiced in the one-way mirror. The artist's juxtaposition of industrial decay and nascent hope is truly transformative, don't you think? My voice was higher, lighter, with a breathy, educated lilt. I sounded like a fool. "Good," Mara said, not looking up from her screen. "You sound like one of them." The plan was a piece of logistics, simple and brutal. Knox had already been inside the gallery as a technician, planting a microscopic transmitter on the back of the iron rain gate. The painting I'd identified, Vale, the restless one, had mapped the service exits and would be waiting in the alley. Ira, the broad-shouldered, quiet one, would be on a rooftop across the street with a long-range directional microphone and binoculars. He was our overwatch. Silas would be Patron 7, an anonymous, high-stakes bidder registered remotely through a Swiss bank. His job was to be the whale, the distraction. My job, as Leah Harcourt, was to get inside the storage room during the auction's peak, retrieve the physical asset I was sure was hidden with the painting, and get out. The laser pen was heavy in my simple black clutch. Mara had also given me a necklace, a simple silver chain with a dark, polished piece of obsidian, a micro camera. "We see what you see," she said. "Don't touch it." The Gallery Viridian was everything I hated about the new Ironhaven. It was a glass and steel box built in the hollowed-out shell of an old shipyard. It was all white walls, track lighting, and people sipping champagne, pretending they weren't standing on the bones of 1,000 union jobs. I walked in, and my boss for the night, the gallery director, a man with a painfully thin mustache, barely glanced at my credentials. "Leah, darling," he gushed, "thank God you're here. We're slammed. Just float. Mingle. Look knowledgeable." I floated, I mingled, I looked knowledgeable, and I waited. At 8:03 they arrived. Bryce Kelton, looking like a stuffed pig in a tuxedo, was clearly uncomfortable. He kept tugging at his collar, his eyes darting around like he was looking for the exits. But the woman on his arm, she was the one in charge. She was tall, with hair the color of a raven's wing, pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked painful. She wore a dress of deep, sapphire blue, and gloves, long, satin gloves of the same electric blue. Reaching past her elbows, she moved like a shark, all smooth, predatory grace. Her smile was a bright, sharp, surgical tool. "Bryce, darling," said the director fond, "and this must be Miss Ariadne Voss." "It is," Ariadne said, her voice like ice cubes clinking in a glass. She was the treasurer, the money. "Show us the art." My blood ran cold. The director, seeing me, the closest intern, waved me over. "Leah, why don't you escort Mr. Kelton and Miss Voss to the main installation?" This was it. I put on the breathy, stupid voice. "Of course, Mr. Davies. Right this way." I led them into the main hall. And there it was. The centerpiece of the show. It was a full-sized, skeletal freight elevator, its steel cage rusted and bare, hanging suspended from the 50-foot ceiling by a dozen thin, black cables. It was lit from below, casting a cage-like shadow across the entire room. The artist called it the ascent of industry. I called it a nightmare. My throat closed. I could feel the lurch, the sudden sickening drop, the scream that I'd swallowed, the smell of burning wiring. My hand, the one holding the clutch, started to shake. "Lock it down, Lila." I put my other hand on my stomach. 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2. "It's visceral, isn't it?" I said, my voice only trembling a little. Bryce just grunted, but Ariadne, she was staring at me. Her dark eyes were amused. "Visceral indeed, Leah. It's almost as if it has personal significance." She knew? Or she suspected. She was toying with me. I tore my gaze from hers, from the hanging cage of my trauma, and looked up. Across the vast open-plan room, on the mezzanine level, leaning against the glass balcony. Silas. He wasn't in a tux. He was in his same perfect, minimalist black suit. He wasn't looking at the art. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking right at me. He didn't nod. He didn't gesture. He just was. He was the anchor, the fixed point in the room. His presence was a silent, invisible line, pulling me taut, holding me steady. I could feel his gaze, a physical weight. "You are not the girl in the elevator. You are the inspector." I turned back to Ariadne. The stupid, breathy smile was back on my face. "It's meant to provoke, isn't it? If you'll follow me, the auction pieces are this way." I got them seated. I got them champagne. And then the main event began. I stood at the back of the room, by the catering station, pretending to check a clipboard. "Lot number 7, the auctioneer called. "The magnificent iron rain gate, an abstract on steel by Marcella Dubois." They brought the painting out. It was a large, square canvas of rusted, brutalist metal. It was ugly. "We will start the bidding at $50,000, the auctioneer said. $100,000, Bryce Kelton called out, reading from a card. $200,000, another bidder from the front row. $500,000, Bryce said, his voice straining. And then a new voice, coming from the speakers, the remote bidder. Patron 7. $1 million, the auctioneer announced, his voice leaping. The room gasped. $1,500,000, Bryce shot back, sweating now. $3 million, the speaker voice said, calm and bored. The room was silent. Ariadne Voss put her gloved hand on Bryce's arm, stopping him. She was smiling. This was the game. They were bidding against themselves, against Silas, to inflate the price. $4 million, Bryce said. $10 million, and the speaker voice of Patron 7 said. Dead silence. The auctioneer's gavel was frozen. $10 million for a sheet of rust. I checked my notes. I did the math. The $10 million figure, run through the depreciation and torque formulas from the ledger. Matched exactly. It was the final transfer. The pot. Sold, the auctioneer cried, slamming his gavel. To Patron 7. That was my cue. While the room was applauding and buzzing about the anonymous whale, I slipped through the velvet rope, past the catering station, and into the staff-only corridor. The back of the gallery was a maze of drywall and plywood, the unglamorous guts of the operation. I found the storage room. The door was locked, a simple electronic keypad. My old skills kicked in. It was a standard, commercial-grade lock. I punched in the default maintenance code, 1234 star. A beep, a click. The door opened. The room was dark, packed with art in crates and bubble wrap. There, in the center, was the iron rain gate, waiting to be prepped for its buyer. I pulled the heavy black pen from my clutch. I clicked the button on the side, a tiny, high-pitched whine, a pinprick of intense, focused blue light. I didn't try to open the front. I went to the back, to the heavy wooden stretcher bars that formed the frame. I angled the laser at the corner joint, where the wood was stapled and glued. The smell of scorching pine and varnish filled my nose. The laser cut through the wood like a hot knife through butter. I cut a small, neat triangle out of the corner. I reached inside, just canvas. Nothing. No, I'm right. I ran my fingers along the inside of the frame, and there it was, a slight indentation in the wood, a false panel. I used the tip of the pen to pry it open. Tucked inside, wrapped in anti-static foil, was a single, slim hard drive. I grabbed it. I slid it into the hidden pocket Mara had sewn into my dress. My earpiece crackled. It was Ira's voice, sharp and urgent. Lila, HCSU, they're at the front, 6 units. They're not waiting. They're breaching. Warrant signed by Director Jalen Crow. They're coming for the painting. My heart stopped. I ran out of the storage room. As I hit the corridor, the main lights in the gallery cut out. A second later, they were replaced by flashing, rotating red lights, the emergency lights. People were screaming. "This is the Harborview Civil Security," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "We have a warrant to seize stolen property. Nobody move." I saw them. 20 HCSU officers in heavy tactical gear, fanning out, their weapons drawn. Crow. He'd sent them to reclaim the painting, and the hard drive with it, before Silas could take possession. Then, from the mezzanine, Silas Ardent moved. He didn't run. He walked. He descended the glass staircase, stepping calmly into the center of the red-lit chaos. "Officers," he called out. His voice was not a shout. It was a projection. It cut through the panic like a diamond. "I am Patron 7. I am the legal owner of that painting." The HCSU commander pointed his rifle at him. "Sir, step aside." "I will not," Silas said, standing right in front of the Iron Rain Gate. Under Section 4, Article 2 of the Ironhaven Art Commission's charter, any art purchased at public auction becomes the sole, private property of the buyer at the fall of the gavel. You are not on gallery property. You are on my property. And your warrant, signed by a commercial bureaucrat, has no standing. Put down your weapons, or you are all committing armed trespass. It was brilliant. It was nonsense. It was a beautiful, perfect, calculated stall. The officers froze, confused. A city charter? They were ready for a fight, not a legal debate. This was my chance. I ducked into a dark side corridor, heading for the service exit Vale was watching. A figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. Ariadne Voss. She was perfectly calm, a small, amused smile on her face. The blue satin of her gloves seemed to glow in the red emergency light. My, she whispered. "The little intern is in a hurry. You don't belong here. Leah Harcourt. You don't belong with the cheap coats and the broken-down safety inspectors." My hand instinctively went to the laser pen in my clutch. "I belong with the survivors," I said, my voice no longer breathy. "It was my own." Ariadne's smile widened. "I thought so." She stepped aside. As I rushed past her, her gloved hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was like steel. I froze. She didn't stop me. She just held my hand, palm up. With her other hand, she dropped something small, cold, and metallic into my palm, a silver card. "When you get tired of being the good guy," she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Call me. He's not the only one in Ironhaven who can offer protection." She released my wrist and melted back into the shadows. I ran. Just as I reached the end of the hall, the main fire alarm went off, a deafening, shrieking klaxon. "Knox," I heard in my ear. "Periodic fire test, all civilians, evacuate immediately." The crowd, which had been frozen by the HCSU, was now a stampede for the exits. Chaos. I was pushed, shoved, spun around. I lost my balance, falling against a pillar. Panic, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. Then a hand. It grabbed mine. Strong, warm, and utterly familiar. Silas. He was in the middle of the surging crowd, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't pull me. He just held my hand for a half a second, a solid, unmovable point in the chaos. A silent message. "I'm here." Then he let go and was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I shoved open the service door. An alarm blared. I was in the alley. Rain was pouring down. "Up," a voice hissed. "Vale. He was on the fire escape. 10 feet up." He grabbed my arm and hauled me up onto the metal stairs. We scrambled up 3 flights, our feet clanging on the iron. We burst onto the flat, gravel-covered roof. "This way," Vale yelled, pulling me toward the far edge. A new sound, a high-pitched electric whine, like a giant insect. A drone. It rose up from the street, its blue and red lights flashing. An HR drone, high risk, Azure Crown's private security. It wasn't HCSU. It was theirs. It hovered, its camera swiveling, locking onto us. Before I could even scream, Vale had unslung the weapon from his back. It wasn't a rifle. It was a short-barreled launcher. He aimed and fired. Thwump! A weighted net shot out, expanding in the air. It hit the drone perfectly. The rotors tangled, and the machine, silenced, dropped like a stone, crashing silently onto the roof of the next building. "Come on." We ran to the edge. The Orphic, Silas's car, was waiting in the alley 3 stories below, its engine running. Knox was at the wheel. We didn't take the stairs. Vale grabbed a heavy rope, and we half rappelled, half slid down the side of the building, landing hard on the pavement. We piled into the back of the car. The second the door thunked shut, we were moving, fishtailing out of the alley and onto the street, just as the first HCSU officers burst out of the gallery. I was gasping, soaked in rain and sweat, my entire body shaking from adrenaline. "Did you get it?" Silas's voice. He was in the front passenger seat. He hadn't turned around. My fingers fumbled for the pocket. I pulled out the small, foil-wrapped hard drive. It was safe. "I got it," I said, my voice a wreck. I was shaking, but I was also smiling. A wild, triumphant smile. "This isn't just about the money," I said, holding it up. "There's a file on here. I saw the directory before I pulled it. It's a code name. The code name for the person who approved the project, the one who gave the order for my elevator." We were back in the Orphic, the silent, armored vault that was becoming my only reality, slicing through the dark artery of a service tunnel beneath the city. The adrenaline from the gallery roof was draining away, leaving a vibrating, metallic exhaustion in its wake. My hands were steady, but my insides felt hollowed out. "It's encrypted." Mara's voice came through the car's speakers. Crisp and frustrated, she was back at the rookery, patched in. "Military grade AES 256. I can't brute force this, Silas, not without a key." Silas, still in the passenger seat, didn't turn around. "Lila, the directory you saw, the code name." "Cradlefall," I said, my voice housky. I was clutching the small, foil-wrapped drive. It was still warm. The file was named Project Cradlefall. "Is that in the ledger?" he asked. I scrambled for the heavy, leather-bound book, which was on the seat beside me. I flipped through the pages, my mind racing. Yes, I saw it. It was here. I found the entry. It was near the back, a list of assets under the Azure Crown symbol. It wasn't a number. It was a phrase, a short, 4-line stanza about a hammer, a river, and an iron gate. It looks like a poem. It's not a poem, I said, a new energy cutting through my fatigue. I was looking closer, at the ink, at the handwriting that was now becoming as familiar as my own. Mara, can you patch my necklace camera to your main screen? Look at this. I held the book steady. Look at his punctuation. The man who wrote this, he doesn't use a period, it's a check mark, a tiny, precise, right-angled tick. And his commas, they're double dots. It's a substitution cipher, Mara said, her voice quickening. He's using his own notation. But what's the key? He's a mechanic, I said, the pieces clicking into place. An engineer. He wouldn't use letters. He'd use a schematic. The check mark, it's the symbol for a completed circuit, a 1. The double dot, 2. He's not writing words. He's writing coordinates. It's a key based on an old schematic grid. I started reading the poem aloud, not as words, but as a sequence of notations. Check mark, dot dot, blank, check mark. I've got it, Mara cut in, a series of rapid keystrokes. It's a cascading key. The drive is unlocking. We pulled into the silent, concrete bay of the rookery. The heavy door rolled down, sealing us in. By the time I stepped out of the car, the contents of the hard drive were splashed across the main operations monitor. Project Cradlefall. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just my elevator. It wasn't just the housing fires. It was dozens. A timeline of manipulated industrial accidents going back 15 years. A collapsed crane at the West Dock, killing 3. A chemical spill at a processing plant, condemning the whole neighborhood, my elevator, the faulty steel at Dryline Pier. It was a systematic, brutal campaign. They were manufacturing disasters to acquire land. They weren't just exploiting the city's decay. They were the architects of it. They were clearing the waterfront, block by block, life by life, to make way for their new, glittering, glass and steel iron haven. My stomach heaved. All those people, all those accidents I'd read about in the papers. I need the authorization file, I said, walking toward the screen. The one for Dryline, the Apex elevator contract. Mara's fingers flew. A folder opened. A single master authorization document appeared. It detailed the plan, the substandard materials, my report, the scheduled malfunction, my near death, and the media containment plan, my discrediting, handled by Jalen Crow. This was it, the smoking gun, the proof that would burn them all to the ground. At the bottom of the document was the final sign-off, the typed name of the project approver, and a scanned, handwritten signature next to it. My world didn't just stop, it shattered. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. Authorizing signature E, Hart. Typed name Eamon Hart. No, I whispered. It wasn't possible. No, that's my father. The name of the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who smelled of graphite and pine soap, the man who had vanished from my life 10 years ago. It's a forgery, Silas said instantly. He was standing right behind me, his voice a low, steady anchor. Lila, they framed him, just like they framed you. It's what they do. No, I said. I was shaking my head, a horrible, jerky motion I couldn't control. My vision was blurring. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and traced the signature on the high-definition screen. The way the E looped back on itself, the sharp, impatient break in the crossbar of the H, the way the T was crossed high, almost above the letter. It's his, I whispered, and my voice cracked, the sound breaking the silence of the room. I'd know it anywhere. It's his handwriting. He signed it. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Mara was looking at me, her sharp features softened with a pity that felt like acid. Silas was just watching me, his gaze intense, trying to see inside, to calculate this new, impossible variable. My father, all this time, I thought he was a victim, a missing person, but he was one of them. He'd signed off on the project that led to my own accident. My mind flashed back to the ledger, to the list of cold transaction points. Water pump station number 12, I said, my voice dead. I stumbled over to the wall map. He worked there. He was a mechanic. He worked the night shift. It was his last posting, right before he disappeared. I grabbed the ledger from the table, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. I found the entry for the pump station, and next to it, a notation, written in that same sharp, familiar hand. First contract burial spot. I felt the blood drain from my face. I was going to be sick. He didn't just sign, I said, the words tasting like ash. He started it. He was part of it from the beginning. He buried the first contract there. I'm going there, I said. I shoved back from the table, my chair scraping, the sound violent in the quiet room. I'm going there. Now. No. Silas's voice was absolute. He didn't move, but his authority filled the room. You're not... He pointed to the wall map. The pin I had placed on pump station 12 was now covered by a bright, electric blue azure crown marker. It's not an abandoned station. Lila, look at the data from the drive. They acquired it 6 months ago. It's listed as one of their primary data backup hubs. It's a fortress. Silas, Mara said, her voice sharp, cutting through my grief. She was typing furiously, her eyes scanning a new set of files she'd pulled from the city archives. I ran Eamon Hart's name. There's a connection, a deep one. She brought up an old payroll record from the Ironhaven Port Authority, dated 12 years ago. The Port Commission. Before it was gutted, it used to contract external security for its high-risk labor zones to protect union workers from external pressure. She looked up, her eyes meeting Silas's. The contractor was the Ardent Syndicate. I stared at her. What? Your mentor, Silas, the man who raised you. Mara pulled up another file, a shift log. Eamon Hart was the union steward for the dock mechanics. He worked directly with your predecessor. They coordinated on worker safety. The files show they were friends. The room tilted. My father, a union steward, his best friend, the head of the Ardent Syndicate, and my entire life, my firing, his disappearance, it wasn't random, it wasn't an accident. I was born in this. I had been standing at the epicenter of a war between these two organizations, the Azure Crown and the Ardent Syndicate, my entire life, and I had never even known it. He never told me. I whispered, "He was protecting you," Silas said. His voice was low, and he was staring at the name of his mentor on the screen, his expression lost. They both were. Your father, my predecessor, they believed the port belonged to the workers. They believed in this city, not the glass one. He turned to me, his gray eyes burning with a cold fire I hadn't seen before. When my mentor died, I took over. I saw the rot, the politicians, the Bryces, the Crows. I tried to legitimize us. I tried to use the syndicate's power to force infrastructure improvements, to make the port safe, the way they wanted. He gestured, his hand encompassing the entire map. Azure Crown was the answer. They fought me at every turn. They used blood. They used fire. This, he tapped the hard drive, is why they don't want a safe port. They want a dead one they can rebuild from the ashes. A sudden, sharp beep from Knox's workstation shattered the moment. He had been silently monitoring the city's network traffic. Boss, Knox said, his voice flat. The silver card, the one Miss Voss gave Lila. I'd completely forgotten. I pulled it from my dress pocket. It was cold and heavy. It's active, Knox said. It's not just a piece of metal. It's a receiver. It just got a high-frequency data burst. A secure document file appeared on his monitor. It was addressed to me, Leah Harcourt. It was a contract. A temporary asylum and relocation agreement from Azure Crown. It offered immediate extraction from Ironhaven, a new identity, clean, a bearer bond account with a 7-figure balance, and, at the bottom, full amnesty for all unauthorized actions, past and present. It was Ariadne's offer. When you get tired of being the good guy, it was a bribe. It was an exit. It was a way out of all of this. I stared at the screen, my father's signature on one monitor, Ariadne's contract on the other. It was too much. The room was too small. The air was too thick. I can't, I stammered. I pushed the card away like it was burning me. I need air. I fled. I shoved past Knox, through the main ops room, and hit the button for the heavy rolling door. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to slip out onto the loading dock, the same dock where I had first arrived, what felt like a lifetime ago. The rain had finally stopped, but the air was heavy and cold, smelling of wet pavement and the nearby river. I sat on the edge of the concrete dock, my feet dangling in the empty space, and stared at the dark, glistening bricks of the alley wall opposite. The HCSU was out there. Bryce was out there. Ariadne was out there. And my father's ghost was in that room, damning me. I dropped my head into my hands, my shoulders shaking, the breathing exercises, the control, it was all gone. There was just this cold, hollow, sickening ache. I heard a footstep on the concrete, soft, deliberate. Silas. He didn't sit right next to me, and he didn't touch my shoulder. He didn't offer a single word of comfort. He just sat, a few feet away, close enough to be a presence, far enough to give me the space I needed. He just sat there, in his perfect black suit, and stared at the same brick wall. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 5. It was exactly what I needed. It wasn't pity. It was a shared vigil. The sick, hot panic in my stomach slowly cooled, hardening into a cold, dense knot of resolve. What if he signed it? I finally whispered. My voice was a wreck. What if he wasn't forced? What if they paid him, and he took the money? And he's just one of them. What if he's the reason? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he turned his head, his profile sharp in the dim alley light. Then we prove why he signed, he said, his voice flat and absolute. We prove what they held over him. We prove what they threatened. We find out who put the pen in his hand and forced him to write. He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers. He looked down at me, and for the first time, he held out his hand to me. We go to the pump station, he said, and we dig up the contract he buried. I took his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, and he pulled me to my feet in one smooth, economical motion. There was no hesitation. The decision had been made. We didn't take the Orphic. We took a nondescript panel van, the kind that blends into the background of any industrial park, driven by Knox. We moved through the back streets, the veins of Ironhaven that Silas knew, like the lines on his own hand. We parked 3 blocks away from pump station number 12 and went the rest of the way on foot, melting into the shadows of the old shipyards. The station wasn't a fortress. It was a tomb, a massive, brutalist-era brick cube, silent except for the low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the massive pumps driving water beneath the city. It was a sound I'd heard in my nightmares, a slow, mechanical heartbeat. I removed first, a shadow detaching from the wall, and disabled the perimeter alarm with a speed that was terrifying. Silas didn't pick the lock on the heavy steel door. He used a key. My predecessor, he said quietly, believed in redundancy. The air inside was thick. It smelled of old oil, damp concrete, and the sharp, metallic tang of the river. The only light came from a massive, shattered skylight, 100 feet up, where the faint, misty rain fell through the darkness like a spotlight, glistening on the giant, dark green machinery below. He said my father was a friend, I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly small in the vast, echoing chamber. He was, Silas said, his eyes scanning the darkness, which means he would have hidden his insurance where his friend would look. Not an office, no, I said, moving past him. My father hated paperwork. He trusted the machine. I led the way down a set of iron catwalks, our footsteps clanging, echoing the rhythm of the pumps. I knew this place, not from visiting, but from his complaints, the endless stories about the failing gaskets on number 3, the inconsistent pressure from number 5, and the haunted master panel. It was on the lower level, a massive wall of gray painted steel, covered in analog dials and thick switches. I found the specific panel he always talked about, panel 12B. It looked identical to the others, but I ran my hand over it. The paint. It was different, smoother, newer. He painted over it, I whispered. He hid it in plain sight. I pulled the laser pen from my pocket. The intense blue beam cut through the air. I didn't aim for a lock. I aimed at the paint itself. I began to cut a neat 10-inch square, the smell of vaporized enamel filling my nose. The beam sliced through 4 layers of city-grade paint, and then metal. But not the solid steel of the panel. A seam. I used the tip of the pen to pry it open. A small, flush-mounted door, no thicker than a cookie sheet, popped open with a quiet hiss of displaced air. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, was a small, round 8mm film canister, and resting next to it, a single, heavy, ornate brass key. My father's insurance. I grabbed them. I turned, a strangled cry of triumph in my throat, and the world exploded in light. Dozens of yellow flashlight beams lanced through the darkness, pinning us against the control panel. They weren't from the entrance. They were from the catwalks above. They'd been waiting for us. Well, well, Bryce Kelton's voice boomed, distorted by the echoing chamber. The little safety inspector digging up graves and Arden. I should have known you'd be here. I couldn't see him, just the blinding lights, and they knew, I whispered, my blood turning to ice. This was a trap. Ira, Silas said. His voice was perfectly calm. Ira didn't speak. He moved, in one fluid motion. He stepped in front of us and threw 2 small, silver canisters up toward the catwalks. They didn't explode. They hissed. A thick, acrid, silver-gray smoke instantly filled the upper air, swallowing the flashlights, turning the beams into diffused, hazy cones. Shouts erupted. "Get the girl!" Kelton roared. A shot rang out. A chip of concrete exploded from the wall next to my head. I didn't even have time to scream. Silas grabbed me, not by the arm, but by the front of my jacket, and threw me backward into the gap behind a massive iron staircase. I landed hard, the cold steel rattling my teeth. He was in front of me a second later, a solid wall of black, shielding me with his own body. The air was filled with noise, the clang, clang, clang of ricochets, the heavy thump of Ira's return fire, and the screams of Kelton's men as they were blinded by the smoke. I was shaking, my breath trapped in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I was back in the elevator. The walls were closing in. Silas leaned in, his body pressing me hard against the vibrating steel. His mouth was directly at my ear. His breath was hot, a stark contrast to the cold fear gripping me. "Trust me," he whispered. The words, his breath, his absolute proximity, it was a jolt, a current that shot right through the panic. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. A wild, terrifying, electric focus. He wasn't scared. He was in his element. I managed a single, sharp nod, my hair brushing against his cheek. "Ira Conduit," Silas shouted. He didn't give me time to think. He grabbed my hand and pulled me, crouching low, running from the cover of the stairs. I saw what he was aiming for, a massive 4-foot diameter ventilation duct, its cover hanging open. Ira laid down a final burst of covering fire. We dove into the duct. It was pitch black, smelling of rust and dead air. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, Silas right behind me, his hand on my ankle, pushing me, guiding me. I could hear muffled shouts and the heavy thump of boots on the metal behind us. We spilled out, falling onto a vibrating steel floor. We were in another room. This one wasn't echoing. It was filled with a deafening, high-pitched whine. The turbine room. Silas slammed the heavy steel door behind us, throwing 2 massive, rusty bolts. The sound of the fight was gone, cut off. There was only the overwhelming, deafening shriek of the generator. We were safe. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, the film canister clutched in my hand, my whole body vibrating, not just from the machine, but from the adrenaline. And then the crash came. The shaking started, deep and uncontrollable. I'd faced down Bryce. I'd infiltrated the gallery, but the gunshots, the feeling of being hunted. My knees buckled. Silas caught me, but he didn't say, "It's okay." He didn't offer any empty platitudes. He just grabbed my upper arms, holding me steady, forcing me to stand. "You're okay, Lila," he said, his voice cutting through the whine of the turbine. "You're here. You're safe. Breathe." I looked at his face. He was covered in grime from the duct. There was a smear of dust on his cheek. His eyes, those cold gray eyes, were blazing. He saw the terror in my face. He saw me shaking. Slowly, deliberately, he let go of my arms. He raised one hand, his fingers covered in dust. He didn't touch my shoulder. He touched my face. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed the grime from my cheek. It was the gentlest thing I had ever felt. My breath caught. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed his wrist, holding his hand to my face with my other hand. I pressed it flat against his chest, against his heart. It was hammering, a wild, frantic, trapped bird rhythm that matched my own. He wasn't a statue. He wasn't made of stone. That realization, the shared, frantic proof that we were both just alive, broke the last thread of my control. I surged forward, pulling his face down to mine. Or maybe he met me halfway. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. It was nothing like the kitchen. This was desperate. It was raw. It was the frantic, breathless, clawing need to affirm that we were here, that we were breathing, that we had survived. It was deep and bruising, and it tasted of dust and adrenaline and the metallic tang of fear. His other arm locked around my waist, pulling me tight, lifting me slightly off my feet. I was pressed against the cold, vibrating steel wall, but my front was a furnace, lit by the contact. My fingers tangled in his hair, which was damp with mist and sweat. His hand, the one I'd grabbed, was now cupping the back of my neck, holding me, anchoring me. The whine of the turbine was a single, sustained note that blocked out the entire world. There was nothing but this. His mouth, his hands, the solid, living, breathing proof that we were not dead. The kiss deepened, shifting from frantic survival to something else, a darker, hotter need, a raw, building pressure that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the man holding me. And just as I was about to lose myself in it, just as the last of my rational thought was about to burn away, he broke it. He tore his mouth from mine, but he didn't let me go. He just rested his forehead against mine, his chest heaving, his breath coming in hot, ragged gasps that matched my own. We were both shaking. My eyes fluttered open. He was looking at me, his eyes dark and dilated, his face inches from mine. He was fighting for the same control that I had already lost. A shaky, breathless, half-hysterical smile touched my lips. "We're alive!" I panted. His expression, so hard and focused, softened. He saw my smile. He let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh. "We're alive." He didn't kiss me again. He just held me there, his forehead against mine, letting the adrenaline drain, letting our hearts slow from a sprint to a gallop. It was a promise that this was for later. My earpiece, which I had forgotten I was wearing, crackled. "South exit," Knox's voice, calm and clear. "Vale is moving. You have 30 seconds. The spell was broken. Silas nodded, pulling back, though his hands lingered on my waist. "Come on." He unbolted a low-profile service exit. We slipped out onto a dark, wet catwalk overlooking a service road. A white municipal salt truck was idling below. Vale waved once from the driver's seat. We half slid, half climbed down a maintenance ladder and tumbled into the back, onto rough burlap sacks. The truck lurched into motion before the doors were even closed. We were safe. We were out. We drove for 10 minutes in the dark, bumping and swaying. Silas was on his comms, speaking in low, clipped tones. I was just breathing. The film canister was still clutched in my hand. I fumbled in the go bag that Ira had thrown in the back, a small, battery-powered, handheld projector. Mara thought of everything. "Knox, cut the lights in the back. Silas said. The truck bed went pitch black. I threaded the small reel, my hands still shaking. I pointed the beam at the flat, white-painted metal wall of the truck. A clicking sound, and then an image. It was grainy, silent. It was my father, Eamon Hart. He was in his workshop. He looked tired, worn down. But it was him. He was humming. I could see his throat move, the lullaby, the one about the river and the moon. A sob caught in my throat. Then the camera panned. A man was sitting across from him. I couldn't see his face, just his hand resting on the table. He was wearing a heavy, gold signet ring, set with a deep blue stone, the azure crown. He pushed a stack of papers toward my father. My father's face, it was a mask of grief. He looked broken. He picked up the pen. He signed the paper, E. Hart. He'd done it. He was guilty. I let out a small, broken sound. But the film wasn't over. As he put the pen down, his eyes, those familiar, kind eyes, darted up, directly at the camera, as if he knew he was being filmed, as if he knew who would be watching. His face was a mask of cold, desperate warning. The film flickered. He looked right at me, right through the years. He mouthed a single word. No, two. I read his lips clearly. Trust Ardent. The film ran out, the white-hot bulb projecting a blank square on the wall. I wasn't just shaking. I was crying, a single hot tear, then another spilling over, a silent, painful flood. He wasn't a traitor. He was a prisoner. He'd been leaving me a message that had waited 10 years to find me. Silas went completely still. His comms conversation had stopped. He looked from the blank white square on the wall to my face. He didn't move to hold me. He didn't offer a word. He just sat there. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't an invasion. It was just a weight, a solid, heavy, grounding presence in the dark. I looked at his hand, strong and covered in grime, resting on my jacket, and I covered his hand with my own. I gripped his fingers, tight. This time, I wasn't the one being pulled from the fire. I was reaching back. Across town, in a glass-walled penthouse, Bryce Kelton watched a black and white feed from the HCSU, the pump station. His men were being cuffed. He hurled his crystal glass against the wall, where it shattered. He thinks he's clever, Bryce spat, his voice a low growl to the figure standing in the shadows. He thinks that tin can of his is safe. Find the rookery, find it and burn it to the ground before sunrise. We didn't let go. My hand stayed locked in his as we walked back into the concrete heart of the rookery. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. But the film had changed its shape. It wasn't the anchor of a traitor's legacy. It was the sharp, driving point of a spear. Trust Ardent, my father's last command. The atmosphere in the safe house had transformed. The shock and emotional discovery were gone. This was a war room. Bryce won't stop, Silas said, his voice flat, releasing my hand to point at the main screen. He was testing us at the pump station. He knows we have the film. He knows we have the drive. He's no longer trying to contain us. He's trying to eradicate us. Mara was already at the main console, her face illuminated by cascading lines of code. The hard drive's data was being mapped, cross-referenced with city databases, political donor lists. He's deeper than we knew, she said, her voice sharp with a cold, academic fury. A new branch of the conspiracy snapped into view on the map, a thick blue line connecting the Azure Crown's Cradle Fall project to a new name. Interim Mayor Whitlock. Our new mayor, Mara spat. He's not just on their payroll. He's a subsidiary. His surprise campaign was funded entirely by 3 shell companies, all of which trace back to the housing developments that were condemned by those fires. So they don't just own the HCSU, I said, the scale of it making me dizzy. They own the city. They're about to, Silas said. He pointed to a calendar alert on the screen. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The Port Commission holds its final vote on the new waterfront leases. Locke is pushing it through. They're not just acquiring land, they're voting to give themselves the entire coastline. This was it, the end game. I stepped forward. This was my territory. This isn't a shadow war anymore. This is a public indictment. I pointed to the 3 pieces of evidence on the steel table, the leather ledger, the black hard drive, the small, round film canister. The ledger is the history. The drive is the criminal enterprise. And the film is the human cost. It's the proof of coercion. I looked at Mara. I'm not just an inspector. I write reports. I'm going to write one final report, a full public declaration, the Cradle Fall Confession. We'll time its release for exactly 9 a.m., just as the commission meets. Silas watched me, his expression unreadable. He nodded. Once. Good. That's one prong of the attack, public pressure. He stepped up to the map, his presence shifting from protector to general. But Locke will dismiss it. He'll call it a smear campaign. The commission will vote anyway. We need a second prong, a sharper one. He tapped the screen, isolating the direct money trail to Whit Locke. We release part of the data to the public, the Cradle Fall project, the housing fires, the accidents. Enough to get the unions, the press, and every displaced citizen screaming for blood and marching on that hall. He then tapped the file linking Locke directly to the laundered money. This we hold back. We don't send this to the press. We send this directly to him. 15 minutes before the vote, blackmail. Pure and simple. He looked at me, his eyes cold. There are good people still working at the Port Authority, people trapped in the system. We use this leverage not just to burn Locke, but to extract those people safely. We don't just set a fire, we control the burn. I stared at him, at the ruthless, brilliant calculus of it. One condition, I said. My voice was low, and it cut through the room. Both he and Mara looked at me. My father, Eamon Hart, my hands were clenched at my sides. When this story breaks, his name is not in it as a co-conspirator. He's not a footnote. He's the headline. He's the first victim, the whistleblower they silenced to start this. The film proves it. We clear his name. We honor him. I looked right at Silas. Or the deal is off. I'll burn the drive myself. Silas didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh the options. He just held my gaze. He was a friend of this house. Lila, before he was a victim of our enemy. His name will be the banner we carry. A fragile peace settled on the room. We had a plan. A desperate, impossible, two-front war. It lasted for exactly 30 seconds. The loading bay door hissed open. Vale, the young, restless one, stumbled in. He wasn't wearing his usual cocky grin. He was pale, his hands shaking. He'd been on perimeter watch, monitoring HCSU comms. "They're coming," he choked out. They're here." "What?" Mara was on her feet. "It's not a rumor. It's not a patrol. It's a full tactical deployment, HCSU, and Crow's fake FCIB unit. They're staging at the end of the industrial park. They know this location." He glanced at the clock on the wall. ETA 3:10 a.m. My blood went cold. That was in 6 minutes. Bryce wasn't waiting for sunrise. "Now," Silas commanded. The room exploded into calm, terrifying action. There was no panic, just procedure. "We're burned. This asset is gone." Mara was already at the server rack, jamming drives into a degausser, wiping everything. "The core data is secure. I'm taking it." "Knox!" Silas barked. Knox, who had been silent, tapped a final key on his terminal. "The ghost is live, boss." A small map appeared, showing a new, powerful signal pinging from a different location. "I'm sending the entire armada to the old Azov chemical plant, 3 miles south. They'll be wading through toxic sludge and rusted-out vats for the next 2 hours. He snapped his laptop shut. "We're gone." We were at the loading bay, the same one I'd entered what felt like a lifetime ago. 2 panel vans were idling, their engines silent. This was it. Evacuation. "Mara, you and Ira take the core data. Head for the north checkpoint," Silas ordered. "Knox, you run the ghost protocol from your van. Keep them occupied." "What about you?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Bryce isn't just sending HCSU. He's sending his own men, Silas said. Vale and I will run interference. We're the real target. He was about to turn, to get in his van, but he paused. He looked at me, at the film canister and the brass key I was still clutching in my hand. He reached out and closed my fingers over the key. You earned this, he said. The film was the message. This is the inheritance. My predecessor didn't just trust your father with his life. He trusted him with his secrets. I stared at the heavy, ornate brass key. Where would a mechanic, a union man, keep his last will and testament? Not a bank, not a vault. The memory hit me like a physical blow, a cold, marble floor, a lollipop from a teller. The North Key Cooperative, I whispered. Silas and Mara both looked at me. It was the old dock workers' credit union, I explained, the pieces falling into place. My dad, he made me open my first savings account there when I was 8. He said it was a bank for workers, not for suits. They had old, pre-war safe deposit boxes. The mechanics used them to store their papers, their tools, their secrets. It's still there, Mara said, already pulling up the address on her tablet. Rebranded as a community bank. But the vault is original. I'm going, I said. It wasn't a question. The bank opens at sunrise, at 7 a.m. Whatever he left me, whatever he buried, it's in that box. Silas nodded. The teams were split. This was the moment. He was going into the fire, and I was going into the past. Knox held the door of his van open for me. I was to go with him, the safest route. Silas and Vale were walking to the other van, the one that would lead the chase. Silas? He stopped, his hand on the van's door. He turned. The dim light of the loading bay carved his face out of the shadows. If I don't get out, I said, my voice shaking, but my resolve firm. If they're waiting for me at the bank, if Crow or Bryce, if I don't make it, you have to promise me. Lila? He started. No, promise me, and I insisted, stepping toward him. You release the data, all of it. You burn Locke, you burn Crow, and you clear my father's name. You promise me. He didn't answer. He walked back to me, closing the distance between us in 2 long, fast strides. He didn't look like a boss or a general. He looked like the man in the turbine room, his eyes blazing with a contained, furious fire. He put his hands on my shoulders, his grip like steel. I'm not clearing his name, he said, his voice a low, rough growl that was meant only for me. I'm clearing yours. I am getting you out of these shadows. You will come back. He didn't wait for me to reply. He didn't kiss me. He didn't have time. He pulled me in. It wasn't a kiss. It was a hug. Fast, hard, and desperate. It wasn't tender. It was tactical. It was the frantic, grounding act of a soldier bracing his partner before a breach, my arms wrapped around his waist, my fingers grabbing the thick fabric of his jacket, my face pressed for one fleeting second against the solid, steady wall of his chest. I felt his heart, beating its controlled, powerful rhythm. It was over in an instant. He pushed me back, holding me by the shoulders. His eyes were locked on mine. There were no promises of, be careful. There were no words of affection. There was just a shared, silent, terrible understanding. Go, he said. I turned and climbed into Knox's van. The door slid shut, plunging me into darkness. I felt the vehicle move, pulling out of the bay, leaving the rookery behind forever. The night was almost over. Dawn was a faint, sick, gray line to the east. The air in the van was cold, and it didn't smell like rain or the harbor. It smelled like ozone, like the electric. Pressurized silence right before a lightning strike. Ironhaven was holding its breath. Miles away, in a glass-walled penthouse high above the city, Ariadne Voss watched the red and blue lights of the HCSU convoy snake toward the chemical plant. She held a delicate porcelain cup, the steam rising in a perfect, straight line. Bryce Kelton was pacing behind her, his face a mask of purple rage. "I told you to burn it," he shouted, his voice echoing off the glass. "I wanted a fire. I wanted Arden's head." Ariadne didn't turn. She just watched the false raid. "You're going to burn the bird's nest. Bryce," she murmured, her voice laced with a faint, bored amusement. She took a sip of her tea. "Be careful of the Firebird." I walked into the North Key Cooperative at 7:01 a.m. The bank was a tomb of polished marble and old, dark wood, smelling of floor wax and old money. My footsteps echoed, too loud in the morning quiet. The brass key felt impossibly heavy in my pocket. A piece of a forgotten world. The young teller at the counter looked up, bored. I need to access a safe deposit box," I said. My voice was husky. "It's an old one." "Third vault," she said, not looking up from her magazine, just pointing a polished nail. "Mr. Henderson." An elderly man in a bow tie, who looked as old as the vault itself, slowly led me to a massive circular steel door. He took my key, then his own, and we walked into the vault. The air was cold, still, and dead. "Box 118, I said. He found it. He slid his key in. I slid mine in. The brass clicked, a heavy, satisfying thunk that resonated deep in my bones. He pulled out the long, narrow metal box. "I'll leave you to it," he said, gesturing to a small, private viewing booth. I didn't make it to the booth. I set the box on a marble counter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lift the lid. It wasn't full of money, it was full of him. My father. There were 3 things inside: a small stack of letters, bound in twine, a heavy, dark, wooden object, wrapped in oilcloth, and a single faded photograph of me, age 8, missing my 2 front teeth. I unwrapped the wooden object. It was a seal, a heavy, carved stamp. The words Iron Haven Dock Workers Association were carved in reverse around a central image of a crane and an anchor. It was his union, his heart. I grabbed the letters. The first few were just notes, to me, about my school, about a bike he was fixing. Then the last one, the one written on different paper, his hand, but it was frantic. The ink pressed hard into the page. "My Lila, if you're reading this, I am gone, and they have made me do the unforgivable. They came to me, the men with the blue crown. They didn't offer me money, they offered me you." My breath caught. I had to lean on the counter. They showed me pictures. You at your school bus stop, you at the playground. They said they would make it an accident, a crosswalk, a playground tragedy. A sob, a hard, dry sound, ripped from my throat. I had to sign, to buy your safety, to keep the wolves at bay. They made me part of Cradlefall, but I've been leaving a trail. I put this here. I sent word to the only man I ever trusted, the man who protected our docks, the man who raised a son named Silas. I send this seal to him, to Ardent's heir, as my last will. Trust him. Lila, he's not like them. He's one of us. The letter ended there. He had run out of time. I was crying, tears of grief and rage and a vindication so sharp it was painful, all blurring together. He wasn't a traitor. He was a father. I had no time. It was 8:15 a.m. I pulled out the burner phone Knox had given me. I held the letter, my hands shaking, and I hit record. I filmed myself reading the last letter. My voice cracked. I didn't care. I let the world hear the pain, the proof. Then I held up the heavy wooden seal. "My name is Lila Hart," I said, my voice thick but strong. "My father was Eamon Hart, and the Azure Crown. They didn't just take his job. They took his life, and they almost took mine. The Port Commission vote at 9 a.m. is not a lease. It's the final theft. Project Cradlefall is real." I hit send. The file went straight to Mara. At 8:45 a.m., Silas Ardent walked into the Port Commission hall. He wasn't a shadow. He was a statement. His black suit was a void against the polished wood and brass of the hall. He took a seat in the public gallery, as if he were just another concerned citizen. Ira and Vale, in suits of their own, flanked him. He was a king, holding court in his enemy's castle. At 8:50 a.m., Bryce Kelton's master stroke failed. He had tipped off a local news station, promising them the live-action bust of the Ardent Syndicate. The cameras were rolling as the HCSU and Crow's fake FCIB unit used a battering ram on the doors of the Azov chemical plant. They found nothing, just acres of rusted-out vats, toxic sludge, and a single spray-painted message on the wall, "Wrong nest." The live feed showed the HCSU officers, their faces red with embarrassment, wading through ankle-deep green water. Bryce, watching from his car, threw his phone against the dashboard, cracking the screen. The ardent syndicate was a ghost. At 8:55 a.m., Ariadne Voss, watching the same feed, smiled. She saw the video of me, which was now exploding across the dockworkers' internal networks. She saw the HCSU looking like fools. She saw the stock ticker for the Azure Crown's public holding company dip, just 0.5%. But it was a bleed. She picked up her private line. "Execute risk protocol. Alpha 7, yes. Blame all financial irregularities and unsanctioned operational risks on Kelton. Immediately. Cut him loose." At 9:02 a.m., the Port Commission meeting was in chaos. Interim Mayor Whit Locke was at the podium, his face pale and sweating. He had just received the blackmail file from Silas. We must postpone this vote," he stammered. "No," a voice shouted. It was Director Jalen Crow, standing at the back. "We will proceed." "I think not." The heavy oak doors of the hall burst open. It was me. I wasn't an intern. I wasn't a waitress. I was Lila Hart. And I was holding the massive wooden seal of the Dockworkers Association high above my head. And behind me, the hall flooded. Dozens of men in canvas jackets and steel-toed boots, the dockworkers. They had seen the video. They were here for Eamon Hart's daughter. They flooded the chamber, not with violence, but with presence. They filled the aisles. They lined the walls. They banged their hands on the tables, a slow, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that sounded just like the pumps under the city. "Investigate Cradlefall," one of them roared. "We demand an investigation." Jalen Crow, his face purple and panicked. He saw his world dissolving. He pointed at me, his hand shaking. "Arrest her. Arrest that woman. She is a domestic threat. She is disseminating false federal documents." The HCSU officers in the hall, confused, drew their sidearms, moving toward me. "A fascinating charge. Director," Mara Quinn's voice, amplified by the hall's microphone, was like a shard of ice. She had stepped up to the legal podium, flanked by Silas's lawyers. "Given that you are not a federal agent." Crow froze. "What did you say?" "I said," Mara continued, her voice crisp and clear, "that under the Federal Commerce and Intelligence Bureau's internal charter, Section 11.4b, an agent's identification number is regionally coded. Your number, 118821, is formatted for the Southwest region, specifically the Phoenix-Tucson corridor, not the Northeast." She looked up, her eyes pinning him. "You are a fraud, and that," she pointed to the HCSU officers, "is impersonating a federal officer, a felony punishable by 20 years. The room exploded. The officers stopped. They looked at Crow. They looked at their own commander, who was looking at Mayor Locke. They lowered their weapons. In that single, perfect, beautiful moment of absolute chaos, Silas stood up. He walked. Not to me, not to the podium, but to a woman in the press box, a veteran reporter, her face lined with a lifetime of skepticism. He placed the black hard drive on the railing in front of her. Ira was already standing behind her, a silent, unmovable guardian. The truth was out. Bryce Kelton saw it. He was watching the live feed from his car. He saw my face. He heard Mara. He saw Silas hand over the drive. He didn't wait. He threw the car in reverse, squealing out of his reserved spot, heading for the private exit. Silas saw him leave. He was already moving. He didn't run. He just flowed. Out a side door, into the concrete canyon of the parking garage. I saw him go. My part was done. I ran after him. I burst through the door into the garage. The air smelled of salt and diesel. A black idling sedan blocked my path. The window slid down. Ariadne Voss. She was wearing sunglasses, even in the dim light. "It's a messy business, being a hero," she said, her voice bored. "I'm leaving Ironhaven, Lila. This division of the company is a toxic asset. My car has room for one more. I'm offering you a clean slate, a new past in a new city, one that doesn't have all this blood and rust." I looked at her, at the clean, quiet, simple exit she was offering. Then, past her, I saw them, 20 yards away, between two massive red, salt-stained shipping containers, Silas standing, blocking Bryce's path. "I'm the man standing between you and the wolves." I looked back at Ariadne. I took the silver card she had given me, the one from the gallery, and I dropped it into a filthy puddle of rainwater by the curb. "I'm not leaving," I said. Ariadne just sighed. A shame. The window slid up. I ran. "You're done, Bryce." Silas's voice echoed off the steel. "I'm just getting started," Bryce roared, his face a mask of sweat and terror. He was cornered. He pulled a glistening, spring-loaded switchblade from his pocket. He lunged, fast, a wild, pig-like squeal in his throat. Silas moved, a blur of black. He dodged the main thrust, but the blade was long. It sliced through his suit jacket, and I saw a dark line instantly bloom on the white shirt underneath, his ribs. He was hit. I didn't scream. I didn't hesitate. I ripped the laser pen from my pocket. I aimed. I fired. The high-intensity blue beam, invisible in the daylight, hit Bryce square in the eyes. He screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound, dropping the knife, his hands flying to his face. My eyes I can't see. It was all Silas needed, even injured. He was a machine. He stepped in. A hard crack as he struck Bryce's wrist, another as he brought his elbow down. He grabbed the front of Bryce's tuxedo, spun him, and slammed him, full force, against the steel rungs of a container ladder. Bryce's head hit the metal with a sickening, hollow thud. He slid to the pavement, unconscious. A massive ship horn blared from the port, the sound vibrating in my chest, and as if the sound had torn the sky. The rain began, a cold, sudden, cleansing downpour. "Don't move. Ardent, shoot him. Shoot him now." Jalen Crow. He'd escaped. He was standing at the garage entrance with two HCSU officers who were still loyal to him, their guns drawn, aimed at Silas. Silas didn't even turn. He was leaning against the container, one hand pressed to his side, his breathing sharp. The officers raised their weapons. Ariadne Voss's sedan, which I thought had left, was still there, idling. She just snapped her fingers, a sharp, loud sound. Two men, in black suits that were almost as good as Silas's, stepped out from behind the car. They weren't HCSU. They moved like Ira, like Knox. In 2 seconds, they had disarmed Crow's officers, their hands twisted behind their backs. One of them grabbed Crow, yanking his arms behind him. Ariadne got out of the car, holding an umbrella. She walked over to the sputtering, terrified imposter. "We're playing the long game, you idiot," she said, calmly. Her men forced Crow to his knees. "And your part is over." The chaos in the parking garage dissolved as quickly as it had erupted. The rain, heavy and cold, was already washing Bryce's blood from the pavement. The loyal HCSU officers, seeing Crow on his knees with a gun to his head, dropped their weapons, their faces a mask of confusion. Ariadne Voss didn't even look at me or Silas. She simply gestured, and her men hauled the sputtering Jalen Crow to his feet. "This asset is a liability," she said into her phone. "Liquidate the account, all of it." She got back into her sedan, her umbrella folding with a pneumatic hiss, and the car slid silently out of the garage, just as the first sirens of the real Ironhaven police, undoubtedly summoned by Mara, began to wail in the distance. Bryce was cuffed, a thick zip tie pulled tight around his wrists. He was conscious now, spitting and cursing as two officers pulled him to his feet. He saw me, and his face contorted in a final, pathetic snarl of hatred. "This isn't over, you bitch!" he screamed, his voice echoing. "You think he wins!" He lunged, a motion, toward Silas, who was leaning against the container. his hand pressed to his side, his face pale and slick with rain. "Ardent will be swallowed. The crown is bigger than you. It's bigger than all of us." Silas didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on me, making sure I was okay. They dragged Bryce away. The reign of Bryce Kelton, built on cheap steel and intimidation, was over. The dam had broken. The truth, now in the hands of the press, was a flood. By noon, the Port Commission vote was indefinitely suspended. Interim Mayor Whitlock had barricaded himself in his office. Jalen Crow was being held on multiple federal charges, starting with impersonating an officer. The Harborview Civil Security Unit was temporarily dissolved, its authority revoked, its assets frozen pending a citywide investigation into Project Cradlefall. Later that day, on the burner phone, I received one final voice message. It was Ariadne. Her voice was calm, bored, as if she were commenting on the weather. "The nice thing about the bad guy's door, Lila, it's always open, especially when the good guys lock theirs. Don't lose my number." The message deleted itself. 2 days later, the rain was gone, replaced by a weak, watery sun that did nothing to warm the city. We weren't at the Rookery. It was gone. A ghost in the network. We were at the pump station. It was no longer a place of fear. Mara, using a dozen anonymous donations, had established the Aim Heart Compensation Fund for victims of industrial negligence. The first official act of the fund was this memorial. It was quiet, not a press event, but a gathering. Old men in canvas jackets and worn-out union caps, the men who had worked with my father, they stood, their hands in their pockets, looking at the place where he had hidden his last message. I walked forward, my hands steady. I was carrying the heavy, dark wood Union seal. It had been cleaned, its deep carvings polished. I placed it inside a simple glass case that had been bolted to the wall. An old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, stepped up after me. No, he didn't say anything. He just placed his gnarled, work-stained hand on the glass, right over the seal. A silent salute. I backed away, the tears coming, but this time they weren't for his loss. They were for his victory. I looked for Silas. He wasn't in the small crowd. He was standing 100 feet away, back in the deepest shadows of the steel roof, his black coat blending with the machinery. He was watching, but he stayed apart. He was not. He seemed to be saying, "A part of this. This was my light. This was Eamon Hart's day. He would not cast his shadow on it." That night, I found him on the wooden porch of a new building. It wasn't a hidden safe house. It was a half-finished workshop on the waterfront funded by the Ardent Syndicate, a new community center and trade school for the dock workers. They were rebuilding. He was staring at the city lights on the water. He'd changed his shirt, but I could see the thick white bandage through the thin cotton. He moved stiffly. "They honored him," I said quietly. "It was his due," Silas replied, his voice hoarse. He was tired. The fight, the wound it had cost him. He turned to me. He was holding a piece of paper. It was the receipt from Marlin and Company, the one he had written my safe passage clause on. He held it out to me. "Your freedom," he said, his voice low and rough. "It's more important than any victory. The city is safe. You're free to go, the way we agreed." I looked at the flimsy piece of paper, the promise of my exit, the life I could have. I didn't take it. Instead, I stepped closer. I looked at the dark, ugly stain on his bandage, a small, fresh bleed. "You're protecting the entire city," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Who's protecting you?" My fingers, trembling slightly, reached out. I didn't touch the paper. I touched him. I gently lifted the side of his shirt, my knuckles brushing his skin, just enough to check the dressing. It was clean, but the wound beneath was angry. He stopped me, his hand covering mine, his grip warm and sure. He held my hand against his side, against the heat of his skin, against the proof of his wound. He didn't speak. He just led me inside, away from the cold night air. The room was warm, lit by the golden, flickering light of a single, blazing fireplace. The smell of fresh-cut pine from the construction and wood smoke filled the air. The rain had started again, a gentle, drumming rhythm on the new roof. He stood in front of me, his hand still holding mine against his side. He just looked at me. He was searching my face, not as a general, not as a boss, but as a man who was finally, completely, off duty. I was the one who moved first. I raised my other hand, the free one, and did what I'd wanted to do in the turbine room. I touched his face. My fingers traced the line of his jaw, the dust and grime from that night now gone, but the exhaustion still there. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch. This kiss was not the collision in the pump station. It was not the hesitant discovery in the kitchen. It was an arrival. It was deep and slow and searingly gentle. It was a conversation without words. His lips were soft, and he tasted of the coffee he must have been drinking and of the wood smoke. It was a kiss of profound, staggering relief. My hands moved from his face, one sliding to his uninjured side, the other to the back of his neck, my fingers threading into his hair. His arms wrapped around me, his hands splayed wide across my back, holding me, not with the desperate strength of the fight, but with a simple, solid, grounding claim. He held me as if I were the only fixed point in his world. We moved, slowly, just breathing each other in, until we were on the wide, comfortable couch in front of the fire. We just held each other. His head rested in the curve of my neck, his breath finally slowing, warm against my skin. My hand slid under his shirt, feeling the heat of his skin, the tight wrap of the bandages. I felt the tension, the years of coiled, controlled vigilance. Just release. It was a surrender, not to me, but to the moment. We stayed there, in the warm, golden light, our bodies pressed together, a silent, unspoken vow. It was trust. It was safety. It was the future. We didn't cross the final line. We didn't need to. Our hearts had already chosen. The next morning, I signed a new contract, not for a severance, not for an escape. My new title, Community Transparency Supervisor. My job, funded by the new Port Commission, was to be the independent auditor for every new construction project on the waterfront. I was the watchdog, the inspector. I had my old job back, but with real power. My work was independent, but my protection that was guaranteed by the ardent syndicate. Silas was changing, too. He was honoring his mentors and my father's true legacy. He was pulling the syndicate out of the gray. No more money laundering, no more backroom deals. He was reshaping his power, his soldiers, into a legitimate community security force. He was becoming what my father had believed he was, the port's protector. A week later, I found myself walking past the Marlin and Company. I'd heard it had a new owner. I stopped. On the wall, where a generic print of a sailboat used to be, there was a new piece of art. It was a framed, black and white photograph. It was from that night. I was in the foreground, my face caught in the harsh fluorescent light, my mouth open, shouting at Bryce, who was a blurry, indistinct figure. Beneath the photo, a small brass plaque. The Knight Iron Haven listened. I smiled. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. An anonymous encrypted number. A text message. Cradlefall wasn't over. It was just the beginning. They're still here. Meet at Stormglass Bridge. When the wind changes? Attached was a single image, the blue crown, the symbol of the azure crown, but the color was different. It was no longer sapphire. It was a deep, venomous, emerald green. I looked up from the phone at the city, my city, gleaming in the afternoon sun. I wasn't afraid. I walked back to the workshop. Silas was on the porch, looking out at the harbor. He heard me approach and turned. He didn't speak. He just watched me. I stood beside him, and he put his hand on the small of my back, not a gesture of possession, a gesture of partnership. I smiled, looking at the wind moving on the water. When the wind changes, I said, we change how we dance. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel and help this story reach more people, please press that hype button. It means the world to me.